Captain Ryan Torres stood on the bridge of his ship, the UES Liberty. He watched his crew work hard to fix a big alien ship that was floating in space. The alien ship was dying. Its power was almost gone, and the people inside would die soon. If no one helped them, 3 days ago, Earth got a message from the broken ship. The message was in 17 different alien languages. The smart people on Earth were still trying to understand what it said. But one thing was clear. Someone needed help badly. Ryan looked at his second officer. "Lisa, how are we doing?" he asked. Lisa Price looked up from her computer. Sweat was on her face even though the ship was cool inside. "Captain, we got their power working again for now. Their main engine almost blew up, but we fixed it enough to keep them alive. Our scans show there are 4 different types of aliens on that ship. The rescue took 18 hours. Human workers went outside in space. Suits to fix the alien ship. The space around the broken ship was very dangerous. Most living things would die out there, but the humans kept working. They connected power cables between the human ship and the alien ship. The technologies were completely different, but the humans found a way to make them work together. When the alien ship's air system started working again, both crews cheered. The sound of happiness traveled through space from both ships. 3 weeks later, something amazing happened. Ambassador Kate Morgan was at the United Earth headquarters in Geneva. She got a message that would change human history forever. A hologram appeared in her office. It showed a creature that looked like a giant bug mixed with a tree. Its voice was translated by computers. "Hello, humans of Earth. I am Counselor Vextara of the Galactic Council. Your people have done something that interests us. You saved the civilian transport ship called Harmony of Winds. That ship carried refugees from 4 of our member species. We saw what you did. We want to invite humanity to join our council as watchers. If you do well, you might become full members later." The alien gave Kate coordinates to a meeting place. It also gave detailed instructions for humanity's first trip to meet other intelligent species. President Elena Rodriguez called an emergency meeting of world leaders. Within 3 days, humanity had put together its first team to go to the stars. Dr. Alan Hayes was a scientist who had spent his whole life studying the possibility of alien life. He never thought he would actually meet aliens. Now he was chosen to be humanity's chief science advisor for the mission. "This changes everything," he told his team as they got ready to leave on the spaceship UES Endeavour. "We are not just representing our countries anymore. We represent all humans everywhere." The trip to meet the aliens took 2 weeks using humanity's fastest ship. During the trip, the team studied everything they knew about the alien species they would meet. Ben Clark worked day and night to make the translation computers better. Amy Sullivan, the security chief, looked at reports about possible dangers they might face. When they finally reached the meeting place, what they saw was incredible. A space station as big as Earth's moon was floating in empty space. Its surface was covered with strange patterns that hurt to look at. Smaller ships of many different shapes moved around the station like dancers in a 3-dimensional ballet. The ships belonged to beings whose idea of beauty was completely different from humans. "UES Endeavour, this is Council Station Control," came a voice over the radio. The words were translated into perfect English. "You can dock in Bay 77 Alpha. People are waiting to meet you." Captain Jake Morrison was chosen to fly the diplomatic ship. He guided his vessel through the approach. The docking bay was huge enough to hold an entire city. Their small human ship looked tiny next to all the strange alien craft already parked there. As the team got ready to leave their ship, Ambassador Morgan talked to them one last time. "Remember, we are here to watch and learn. Humanity has waited its whole existence for this moment. Let us not waste it." The airlock opened, and humans took their first steps into a galaxy full of other intelligent life. The welcome committee had 5 beings so different from each other that Dr. Hayes immediately started taking notes. The leader was almost 10 feet tall with blue skin and 4 arms. Each arm ended in delicate fingers that looked like they could play music. It said its name was Diplomat Zorquin of the Hegemony. It would be humanity's guide. "Welcome, humans, to Council Station," Zorquin said. Its voice made sounds that seemed to vibrate in their bones. "Your arrival has created a lot of interest among the member species." The tour that followed was overwhelming. The station had over 40 million beings from 27 different species. They all worked in the huge government that ruled a big part of the galaxy. The aliens gave the humans translator devices. These were small machines that went in their ears and let them talk to any council species in real time. Ambassador Morgan quickly realized that the political system was much more complicated than Earth spies had guessed. The council worked on a voting system where different species had different amounts of power. The power was based on how advanced their technology was, how strong their military was, and how much money they contributed to the galactic community. "The process to become a full member is very thorough," explained Counselor Yethmara. This being looked like a spider made of crystal. Candidate species are tested in 12 different areas. We look at military doctrine, resource management, diplomatic flexibility, technological innovation, cultural stability, and 7 other things. Dr. Hayes raised his hand. "What happens to species that do not qualify for membership?" There was a long pause. "They are offered protectorate status," Zorquin finally answered. "Their worlds are administered by council-appointed governors for their own protection." Security Chief Sullivan looked at Captain Morrison. They both understood what this meant. Species that failed the test lost their freedom. The human team was given rooms in the diplomatic sector. This was a big area where representatives from dozens of species lived. Their neighbors included the Kethmori, a race that breathed methane gas and talked using lights on their bodies. There were also the Veltar, who were made of silicon instead of carbon and experienced time much differently than organic life forms. On their 3rd day, Ben Clark made a scary discovery. While testing the translation systems, he found hidden data streams in the diplomatic communications network. Someone was watching their conversations and analyzing human speech patterns and behavior with advanced psychological software. "We are being studied like lab animals," he told Ambassador Morgan during their daily meeting. "Every word we speak, every move we make, it is all being recorded and analyzed." This discovery changed everything about their mission. They were not just observers here to learn about galactic civilization. They were specimens being evaluated for something much more important than simple membership. Dr. Hayes spent his time in the huge digital libraries, reading historical records of previous species evaluations. What he found was disturbing. Of the last 50 species considered for council membership, only 12 had been accepted. The others had been classified as protectorates. Their military forces were taken away and their governments were restructured according to council rules. "They are not looking for equals," he told the team during a secret meeting in their rooms. "They are looking for obedience." Ambassador Morgan decided to speed up their intelligence gathering. While pretending to cooperate enthusiastically, the human team began conducting their own secret analysis of council operations. Captain Morrison used his access to the station's docking facilities to observe military capabilities. The council had a huge fleet, but their ships were designed for overwhelming technological advantage rather than tactical flexibility. Their crews were highly specialized but seemed uncomfortable with improvisation. Security. Chief Sullivan found critical weaknesses in the station's security systems. The council had grown careless after centuries of unchallenged authority. Their security systems were advanced but predictable. They were designed to stop specific known threats rather than adapt to new approaches. The breakthrough came when Dr. Hayes discovered archived records of something called the Terran Assessment Committee. This was a secret council group created specifically to evaluate humanity. The committee had been watching Earth for over 200 years, collecting data on human military history, technological development, and social evolution. Their conclusions were troubling. Humanity was classified as a high-risk, high-reward species. Their capacity for innovation and adaptation was acknowledged as exceptional, but their history of warfare and resistance to authority made them a potential threat to Council stability. "They are afraid of us," Morgan realized as she read the secret reports. "They invited us here not to welcome us but to neutralize us." The trap was elegant and simple. Bring humanity into the Council structure, evaluate their capabilities under controlled conditions, then either make them subordinates or eliminate them as a threat. Either way, the Council would keep its monopoly on galactic power. That night, as the artificial day cycle dimmed across Council Station, Ambassador Morgan sent a coded message back to Earth. The reception committee was made up of 5 beings so different from each other that Dr. Hayes immediately started writing notes. The leader stood almost 10 feet tall with blue skin and 4 arms. Each arm ended in delicate fingers that looked like they could play musical instruments. It introduced itself as Diplomat Zorquin of the Hegemony. This being would be humanity's guide during their stay. "Welcome, humans, to Council Station," Zorquin said. Its voice made strange sounds that seemed to vibrate inside their bodies. "Your arrival has generated considerable interest among the member species." The tour that followed was overwhelming. The station housed over 40 million beings from 27 different species. All of them worked within the massive government system that controlled a large portion of the galaxy. The human delegation received translator devices, small neural interface units that allowed real-time communication with any Council species. Ambassador Morgan quickly realized that the political structure was far more complex than Earth's intelligence. Services had theorized. The Council operated on a system of weighted voting. Different species were assigned influence based on their technological advancement, military capability, and economic contribution to the galactic community. "The process for full membership is thorough," explained Counselor Yethmara during their first formal briefing. This being resembled a crystalline spider with multiple eyes that glowed different colors. Candidate species undergo evaluation in 12 categories: military doctrine, resource management, diplomatic flexibility, technological innovation, cultural stability, and 7 others. Dr. Hayes raised his hand like a student in class. "What happens to species that do not qualify for membership?" The pause that followed was telling. All the aliens looked at each other before anyone answered. "They are offered protectorate status," Zorquin finally said. "Their worlds are administered by Council-appointed governors for their own protection. Security." Chief Sullivan and Captain Morrison exchanged glances. The implications were clear. Species that failed the test lost their independence. The human delegation was assigned quarters in the diplomatic sector. This was a sprawling complex that housed representatives from dozens of species. Their neighbors included the Kathmori, a race of methane-breathing beings who communicated through glowing patterns on their skin. There were also the Veltar, silicon-based life forms who experienced time at a dramatically different rate than organic species. On their 3rd day, communications. Specialist Clark made a disturbing discovery. While testing the translation systems, he detected hidden data streams in the diplomatic communications network. Someone was monitoring their conversations and analyzing human speech patterns and behavioral cues with sophisticated psychological profiling software. "We are being studied like lab rats," he reported to Ambassador Morgan during their daily briefing. "Every word we speak, every gesture we make, it is all being recorded and analyzed." The revelation cast their entire mission in a new light. They were not just observers here to learn about galactic civilization. They were specimens being evaluated for something far more significant than simple membership. Dr. Hayes spent his time in the vast digital libraries. The Council had collected millions of years of history from across the galaxy. He accessed historical records of previous species evaluations. What he found disturbed him greatly. Of the last 50 species considered for Council membership, only 12 had been accepted. The others had been classified as protectorates. Their military capabilities were systematically dismantled and their governments restructured according to Council guidelines. "They are not looking for equals," he told the team during a secure meeting in their quarters. They are looking for compliance. Ambassador Morgan made the decision to accelerate their intelligence gathering, while maintaining the facade of enthusiastic cooperation. The human delegation began conducting their own covert analysis of Council operations. Captain Morrison used his access to the station's docking facilities to observe military capabilities. The Council maintained a substantial fleet, but their vessels were designed for overwhelming technological superiority rather than tactical flexibility. Their crews were highly specialized but seemed uncomfortable with improvisation or adapting to unexpected situations. Security. Chief Sullivan identified critical weaknesses in the station's security protocols. The Council had grown complacent. After centuries of unchallenged authority, their security systems were sophisticated but predictable. They were designed to prevent specific known threats rather than adapt to novel approaches. The breakthrough came when Dr. Hayes discovered archived records of the Terran Assessment Committee. This was a classified council body specifically created to evaluate humanity. The committee had been observing Earth for over 2 centuries, collecting data on human military history, technological development, and social evolution. Their conclusions were troubling. Humanity was classified as a high-risk, high-reward species. Their capacity for innovation and adaptation was acknowledged as exceptional. However, their history of warfare and resistance to authority made them a potential threat to Council stability. They are afraid of us, Morgan realized as she read the classified reports. They have invited us here not to welcome us, but to neutralize us. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Bring humanity into the Council structure, evaluate their capabilities under controlled conditions, then either integrate them as subordinates or eliminate them as a threat. Either way, the Council would maintain its monopoly on galactic power. During their second week on the station, the human team began to notice subtle changes in how they were treated. Their requests for access to certain areas were politely denied. Guards appeared wherever they went, always maintaining a respectful distance but clearly monitoring their movements. Ben Clark discovered that their quantum communication link to Earth had been severed. The Council had deployed some form of interference field that prevented faster-than-light communication beyond the station's immediate vicinity. "We are prisoners," Captain Morrison reported during an emergency team meeting. "Not officially, but the effect is the same. They have cut us off from home and limited our access to information." Despite these restrictions, the human delegation continued their intelligence gathering. They made contact with civilian populations on the station, beings who were not part of the official government structure. Through these conversations, they learned that several member species had serious grievances with Council policies, but were too afraid to voice them publicly. The Ythmoran were a peaceful species of energy beings. They had been forced to surrender their homeworld's primary energy source to fuel Council military operations. The Kethmori were being gradually relocated from their methane-rich worlds to make room for hegemony expansion. The Veltar had lost their voice in Council decisions after questioning the ethics of forced protectorate status. "There is resistance," Dr. Hayes discovered during a conversation with a Ythmoran civilian named Flexara, species that remember what independence was like before the Council consolidated power. They are small and scattered, but they exist. This revelation presented humanity with a crucial choice. They could continue playing by Council rules and accept whatever decision was reached about their membership, or they could align themselves with forces working to change the system from within. Ambassador Morgan chose a third option that would prove to be either brilliant or catastrophic. She requested a private meeting with the Council's ruling tribunal. She claimed to have information vital to galactic security. When the 5 most powerful Council members assembled in a secure chamber, she presented them with a comprehensive intelligence report on the resistance movement. Humanity has identified 17 separate cells operating within Council territory, she said smoothly. The report was completely fabricated, based on conversations with disgruntled civilians rather than actual intelligence gathering. Our intelligence capabilities are clearly superior to your internal security services. We offer this information as proof of our value as full council members. The tribunal was impressed, despite themselves. The report demonstrated capabilities they had not expected from a candidate species. It showed that humans could gather detailed intelligence without being detected by council security systems. Counselor Prime F. was the ultimate authority in the council hierarchy. He leaned forward in his environmental suit, which allowed him to breathe his homeworld's atmosphere. This is impressive work, Ambassador Morgan. However, it raises questions about humanity's methods. How did you gather this intelligence without our knowledge? The same way we rescued that transport ship, Morgan replied confidently. Humans excel at improvisation and adaptation. We see solutions where others see only problems. The meeting ended with promises of further discussion, but Morgan knew she had bought them only a temporary reprieve. The council would investigate her claims and discover they were exaggerated. They would likely accelerate whatever decision they had already reached about humanity. That evening, she received a coded message from Captain Torres, who had remained in Earth's solar system with a small fleet. The formal evaluation process began with humanity's presentation to the full council assembly. The Grand Chamber was a marvel of engineering that hurt the human mind to fully comprehend. It was a spherical space 3 kilometers wide where representatives from 27 species floated in individual, atmospheric bubbles suited to their specific environmental needs. Ambassador Morgan stood at the central podium, addressing beings whose appearances ranged from hauntingly beautiful to utterly incomprehensible. Some looked like living crystals that sang instead of speaking. Others resembled clouds of gas that somehow maintained consciousness. A few were so alien that the human brain could not properly process what it was seeing. Her presentation covered humanity's technological achievements, cultural diversity, and potential contributions to galactic civilization. She spoke about human art, science, philosophy, and their capacity for both cooperation and individual achievement. We come not as supplicants seeking approval, but as equals offering partnership, she concluded. This statement caused considerable agitation among several council members. Beings that communicated through color changes flashed angry reds and yellows. Others made sounds that the translators could not convert into human language. The questions that followed revealed the depth of anti-human sentiment among certain factions. Councillor Thekvar represented the militant hegemony faction. He challenged humanity's military history with barely concealed hostility. Your species has engaged in continuous warfare throughout its recorded history, Thekvar said, his voice carrying the sound of grinding metal. Over 14,000 separate conflicts in the last 5 centuries alone. How do we know you will not bring this violence to our peaceful galaxy? Dr. Hayes stepped forward to respond. He had prepared for this question during the long journey to Council Station. Councillor Thekvar, with respect. Our research indicates that the Council has been involved in 47 military campaigns in the last century. This includes the complete sterilization of 2 systems. Perhaps the question should be whether humanity can trust the Council's commitment to peace. The chamber fell completely silent. No candidate species had ever directly challenged the Council's actions during an evaluation session. The silence stretched for long moments as beings processed what they had just heard. Councillor Vexthara, the mantis-like being who had first contacted humanity, attempted to restore diplomatic decorum. Dr. Hayes raises valid points about historical context. Perhaps we should focus on humanity's potential future contributions rather than past conflicts. But the damage was done. The human delegation had crossed an invisible line. By showing they would not simply accept council authority without question, over the following days, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Human requests for access to certain historical archives were denied without explanation. Their movements around the station became increasingly restricted. Security Chief Sullivan noticed armed escorts appearing wherever the delegation traveled. The breaking point came when Communications Specialist Clark discovered that their quantum communication link to Earth had been completely severed. The Council had deployed some form of interference field that prevented faster-than-light communication beyond the station's immediate vicinity. "We are prisoners," Captain Morrison reported during an emergency team meeting held in the bathroom of their quarters. It was the only space they could assume was not being monitored. "Not officially, but the effect is the same. They have cut us off from home and limited our access to information." Ambassador Morgan made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. Instead of protesting through official channels, she chose to go around them entirely, using contacts they had developed among the station's civilian population. The human delegation began gathering intelligence on Council operations from non-governmental sources. They learned that several member species had serious grievances with Council policies, but were too afraid to voice them publicly. The Yuthmoran were a peaceful species of energy beings who had been forced to surrender their homeworld's primary energy source to fuel Council military operations. Their entire civilization now depended on energy rations distributed by Council. Bureaucrats. The Kethmori were being gradually relocated from their methane-rich worlds to make room for hegemony. Expansion. Entire populations were being moved to less suitable planets where they struggled to maintain their traditional way of life. The Veltar had lost their voice in Council decisions after questioning the ethics of forced protectorate status. Despite being one of the oldest spacefaring civilizations in the galaxy, they were now treated as junior members with limited voting rights. "There is a resistance movement," Dr. Hayes discovered during a conversation with a Yuthmoran civilian named Fluxara. The energy being communicated through carefully modulated electromagnetic pulses that created patterns of light in the air. Species that remember what independence was like before the Council consolidated power. They are small and scattered, but they exist. This revelation presented humanity with a crucial choice. They could continue playing by Council rules and accept whatever decision was reached about their membership, or they could align themselves with forces working to change the system from within. Ambassador Morgan chose a third option that was either brilliant or completely insane. She requested a private meeting with the Council's ruling tribunal, claiming to have information vital to galactic security. When the 5 most powerful Council members assembled in a secure chamber, she presented them with a comprehensive intelligence report on the resistance movement. Humanity has identified 17 separate cells operating within Council territory, she said with complete confidence. The report was entirely fabricated, based on conversations with disgruntled civilians rather than actual intelligence gathering. "Our intelligence capabilities are clearly superior to your internal security services. We offer this information as proof of our value as full Council members." The tribunal was impressed despite themselves. The report demonstrated capabilities they had not expected from a candidate species. It showed detailed knowledge of Council internal affairs that should have been impossible for outsiders to obtain. Councilor Primeth Colon was the ultimate authority in Council hierarchy. He leaned forward in his environmental suit, which contained an atmosphere of liquid methane that allowed him to survive outside his homeworld. "This is impressive work, Ambassador Morgan. However, it raises questions about humanity's methods. How did you gather this intelligence without our knowledge?" "The same way we rescued that transport ship," Morgan replied smoothly. "Humans excel at improvisation and adaptation. We see solutions where others see only problems. We notice things that others miss because we approach situations differently." The meeting ended with promises of further discussion, but Morgan knew she had bought them only a temporary reprieve. The Council would investigate her claims and discover they were exaggerated. They would likely accelerate whatever decision they had already reached about humanity. That evening, she received a coded message from Captain Torres, who had remained in Earth's solar system with a small fleet. The message was transmitted through quantum entanglement protocols that the Council did not know humanity possessed. It was brief but clear. "Military preparations complete. Awaiting your signal." Humanity had not sent its diplomatic team unprepared. While the delegation negotiated on Council Station, Earth's military and industrial complex had been working around the clock to prepare for the possibility that diplomacy might fail. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Counselor Zorquin arrived at the human quarters with an escort of armed guards. The guards carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy, clearly designed to be effective against a wide variety of life forms. Ambassador Morgan, the tribunal requires your immediate presence, Zorquin announced with formal coldness. There have been developments in your evaluation process? As they walked through the station's corridors, Morgan noticed that the usual civilian traffic had diminished significantly. Security checkpoints had appeared overnight at every major intersection. Armed patrols were visible throughout the diplomatic sector, and the entire atmosphere of the station had changed from welcoming to threatening. Dr. Hayes managed to slip a small recording device to Fluxara as they passed a group of Ythmoran civilians. If the humans did not survive this encounter, at least someone would know what had happened to Earth's first diplomatic team. Security. Chief Sullivan counted guard positions and memorized corridor layouts. Her military training had taught her to always be prepared for the worst-case scenario. She noted potential choke points and escape routes, though she knew their chances of fighting their way out of the station were essentially zero. Captain Morrison observed the alien technology around them with new eyes. The walls contained conduits that carried power and data throughout the massive station. He identified weak points that could be exploited if necessary, though he doubted they would have the opportunity to use such knowledge. Communications Specialist Clark listened to the background chatter of the station's communication systems. Even with their translators restricted, he could detect emotional undertones in alien voices. The tribunal chamber had been changed to make it as intimidating as possible. Instead of the usual circular arrangement that suggested equality among council members, the 5 tribunal leaders sat high above the floor where Ambassador Morgan stood alone. Her delegation waited in a separate chamber under what was politely called protective custody. Counselor Prime Colon did not waste time with diplomatic pleasantries. Ambassador Morgan, the Council has completed its evaluation of humanity's candidacy for membership. The results are troubling. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed detailed analyses of human military capabilities, technological development patterns, and psychological profiles based on thousands of years of human history. The data was more comprehensive than anything Earth's own governments had ever compiled about their species. Your species demonstrates exceptional adaptability and innovation, continued Counselor Vexthara, the mantis-like being who had first contacted humanity. However, these very strengths present an unacceptable risk to galactic stability. Humanity's pattern of rapid technological advancement combined with aggressive territorial expansion cannot be tolerated in a civilized galaxy. The display shifted to show projections of human expansion over the next several centuries. The computer models assumed exponential growth in both technology and territorial control. They painted humanity as an inevitable threat to existing council member species, showing human colonies spreading across the galaxy like a disease. Counselor Vekvar spoke with barely contained hostility. His metallic voice echoed in the chamber like grinding machinery. Your fabricated intelligence report demonstrated both impressive capability and dangerous deception. You attempted to manipulate this council through misinformation. This is exactly the kind of behavior that validates our concerns about your species. Morgan remained silent, waiting for the inevitable ultimatum. She had expected this outcome from the moment they discovered the surveillance systems monitoring their every action. The Council had already made their decision before the evaluation even began. The Council offers humanity 2 options, Ethcolin announced with finality. First, you may accept protectorate status under Council administration. Your military capabilities will be limited to system defense only. Your technological development will be supervised by Council advisors. Your expansion beyond your current solar system will be managed through approved colonization programs. The second option hung unspoken in the air, but Morgan forced them to voice it. She would not let them hide behind euphemisms. And if we refuse protectorate status? Then humanity will be classified as a hostile force threatening galactic peace, Vekvar said with obvious satisfaction. Council military forces will ensure that your species never develops the capability to threaten civilized worlds. The euphemism was clear enough. Refusal meant the systematic destruction of human civilization. They would be bombed back to the Stone Age or possibly eliminated entirely. You have 72 hours to communicate with your government and provide an answer, Ethcolin concluded. During this time, you will remain as guests on Council Station while your decision is considered. Morgan was escorted back to the diplomatic quarters where she found her team under close guard. The quantum communication system remained blocked, but she had expected that. Humanity's contingency plans did not rely on real-time communication. With Earth. Dr. Hayes had spent the previous days analyzing Council military doctrine through their extensive historical records. His findings were both encouraging and terrifying. They are used to overwhelming technological superiority, he reported during a whispered conversation in the quarters bathroom. It was still the only space they could assume was not being monitored. Every conflict in the archives follows the same pattern. The Council identifies a threat, deploys massive fleets with superior firepower, and crushes resistance through sheer force. What about species that resist effectively? Security Chief Sullivan asked quietly. They do not, Hayes replied grimly. Or rather, they do not survive long enough to develop effective resistance. The Council has never faced an enemy that could match their technological advantage. Captain Morrison had been analyzing the station's defensive capabilities during their restricted tours. Their entire military philosophy is based on maintaining technological supremacy. But that creates predictable patterns. They are not prepared for asymmetric warfare or unconventional tactics. Communications specialist Clark had discovered something even more significant during his analysis of Council communication systems. The Council species do not cooperate well under pressure. Each member species has its own military traditions and command structures. Their joint operations rely heavily on centralized coordination rather than adaptive teamwork. Morgan synthesized their intelligence into a comprehensive assessment. The Council was militarily powerful but strategically inflexible. They had grown complacent after centuries of unchallenged dominance, creating exploitable weaknesses that a sufficiently motivated opponent might use. The question was whether humanity possessed the capability to exploit those weaknesses. On the second day of their consideration period, Morgan received an unexpected visitor. Fluxara, the Yithmoran energy being she had spoken with earlier, appeared in her quarters through what seemed to be a ventilation system. Energy beings probably did not need to worry about conventional security measures. Ambassador Morgan, there are things you should know about the Council's capabilities, Fluxara communicated through carefully modulated electromagnetic pulses. The resistance movement you asked about is more real than you probably intended. Over the next hour, Fluxara revealed information that changed everything. The Council's military strength was impressive but not unlimited. Their fleet rotated between sectors on predictable schedules, leaving certain areas temporarily vulnerable. More importantly, several member species provided only token support for military operations. They contributed ships and personnel but retained independent command structures that could be turned if properly motivated. The Kethmori remember their independence, Fluxara explained. The Yithmoran have never forgiven the seizure of our energy reserves. The Veltar are frustrated by their exclusion from decision-making processes. If a credible alternative to Council authority emerged, these species might reconsider their allegiances. The information presented humanity with a third option that the Council had not considered. Instead of accepting protectorate status or facing annihilation, humanity could choose to fight a different kind of war entirely during their conversations. With other civilian populations, the human team learned that discontent with Council rule was more widespread than anyone suspected. The rigid hierarchy that maintained Council power also created resentment among species that remembered what freedom felt like, the Zeftai. were aquatic beings whose ocean worlds had been strip-mined for rare minerals. The Morden were forced to provide food for species that considered their traditional cuisine repulsive. The Zillanith had their entire culture classified as primitive and were being educated into council-approved social structures. There are dozens of species that would support change if they believed it was possible, Dr. Hayes realized. The council maintains power through fear and the appearance of invincibility. If that appearance was shattered, the entire system might collapse. On the final day before their deadline, Ambassador Morgan requested one last meeting with the tribunal. This time, she was accompanied by her entire delegation. The guards allowed it, probably assuming that humans would want to surrender together. "Counselors, humanity has reached its decision," she announced when they were brought before the five most powerful beings in the galaxy. The chamber was filled with representatives from all 27 council species. They had come to witness humanity's submission or defiance. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation. "We decline protectorate status," Morgan said clearly. The chamber erupted with what passed for expressions of shock among the various alien species present. Some made sounds that the translators could not process. Others changed colors rapidly or released chemical signals that created clouds of confusion. Counselor Vekvar actually seemed pleased, as if he had been looking forward to humanity's destruction. His metallic form vibrated with what might have been excitement. "However," Morgan continued, raising her voice above the commotion, "we do not accept your characterization of humanity as a threat to galactic peace. We believe the true threat to peace is the Council's monopoly on power and systematic suppression of species independence." S environmental suit darkened ominously. The liquid methane inside began to swirl more rapidly. "You are declaring war on the Galactic Council?" "We are declaring independence from Council authority," Morgan replied with steel in her voice. "Humanity claims the right to determine its own destiny, and we will defend that right against any force that attempts to deny it." The tribunal conferred among themselves in ultrasonic frequencies that the human translation devices could not process. The conversation lasted several minutes while the chamber remained in stunned silence. Finally, delivered their response. The Council fleet that assembled for the subjugation of humanity was the largest military force mobilized in over 3 centuries. 247 vessels from 12 different species carried enough firepower to turn entire planets into dust. Counselor Vekvar commanded the operation personally, viewing it as an opportunity to demonstrate the consequences of defying Council authority. What they found when they arrived at Earth's solar system defied all their tactical projections. Humanity was gone. Earth remained in its orbit, and the major cities showed signs of recent habitation, but deep space sensors detected no significant human presence in the system. The orbital installations that intelligence reports had described were nowhere to be found. The asteroid mining operations had vanished. Even the small fleet that had been detected during previous reconnaissance missions was absent. "Impossible," Vekvar declared from the bridge of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Inevitable Dominion. "A species cannot simply disappear, they must be hiding." The search that followed was thorough and increasingly frustrated. Human settlements on Mars and the outer planet moons were found abandoned but intact, as if the inhabitants had simply walked away. Genetic scanners detected traces of recent human occupation everywhere, but no actual humans. It took 18 hours of systematic investigation before the Council fleet discovered the truth. Humanity had not disappeared. They had dispersed. Captain Jake Morrison revealed himself first, bringing his ship out of stealth concealment behind Europa. The UES Endeavour was alone, vastly outgunned, but Morrison activated an open communications channel that reached every vessel in the Council fleet. "Council forces, this is Captain Morrison of the United Earth Fleet. I am authorized to negotiate the terms of your withdrawal from this system." Vekvar's response was predictably hostile. "Captain Morrison, you are outnumbered 247 to 1. Surrender immediately and your death will be swift." "Counselor, you are operating under outdated intelligence," Morrison replied calmly. Humanity is no longer confined to this single system. While your fleet was assembling, we were expanding. The tactical display in the inevitable Dominion's command center suddenly lit up with new contacts. Ships were decloaking throughout the solar system, but not in the numbers that would explain humanity's apparent evacuation of their home system. Dr. Hayes had been right about Council military doctrine. They were prepared to face inferior technology with superior numbers, not to adapt to an enemy that refused to follow conventional strategic thinking. Counselor Thekvar, Morrison continued, you are about to learn why humanity has never been successfully conquered by any force we have encountered. We do not fight wars the way you expect. The first demonstration came from Neptune's orbit, where a seemingly empty region of space suddenly revealed itself to contain a massive industrial complex. Humanity had spent the months during the diplomatic mission constructing mobile shipyards and manufacturing facilities, using them to build a fleet designed specifically for asymmetric warfare against Council forces. The human ships were smaller, faster, and cheaper to produce than Council vessels, but they incorporated innovations that the Council's predictable technology had not prepared for. Quantum entanglement communication systems allowed instantaneous coordination across interstellar distances. Adaptive artificial intelligence systems enabled each ship to function independently while maintaining fleet coherence. Most importantly, human vessels were designed for stealth, mobility, and surprise attacks rather than direct confrontation. As Council forces moved to engage the visible human fleet, they discovered that humanity had learned from their intelligence gathering on Council Station. The human ships did not try to match Council firepower directly. Instead, they used superior mobility and coordination to attack weak points in the Council formation. But the real surprise came from outside the solar system entirely. Ambassador Morgan, still confined on Council Station, received a visitor in her cell. Flexara had returned, but this time the energy being was not alone. Representatives from the Kethmori, the Veltar, and 4 other Council member species stood with the Yithmoran. Ambassador, the resistance you helped expose was more organized than we let the tribunal believe, Flexara explained. Your species' defiance has inspired others to reconsider their own subjugation to Council authority. The rebellion that erupted across Council territory was carefully coordinated, striking at critical infrastructure and supply lines that supported the fleet attacking Earth. The Kethmori used their knowledge of methane-based chemistry to sabotage fuel production facilities. The Veltar, with their different temporal perception, had been observing and recording Council activities for decades, providing detailed intelligence on military capabilities and strategic weaknesses. Counselor Ethkolen found himself fighting a multi-front war that the Council's rigid command structure was never designed to handle. Worse, the human ships that had appeared throughout Council space were not attacking military targets directly. They were targeting the economic and logistical infrastructure that maintained Council power. They are not trying to defeat us militarily, he realized during an emergency tribunal session conducted via quantum communication. They are trying to collapse our ability to maintain control over member species. The strategy was working. Species that had remained loyal to the Council for centuries began demanding greater autonomy. Some openly declared independence, protected by mysterious human ships that appeared whenever Council forces attempted to reassert control. Dr. Hayes had been correct about another aspect of Council psychology. They were not prepared for the kind of prolonged, multidimensional conflict that humanity was now waging. Council species thought in terms of definitive victories and clear hierarchies. Humanity thought in terms of evolution, adaptation, and survival. The turning point came when the Zeftai, whose ocean worlds had been strip-mined for rare minerals, seized control of their primary mining facilities and declared independence from Council authority. Within hours, human ships appeared in their system, offering protection and technological assistance. Similar declarations followed from the Morden, the Zillaneth, and eventually 18 other species. Each rebellion was supported by human forces that seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear just as quickly. After 3 months of increasingly desperate attempts to restore order, Counselor Primeth Colon made an unprecedented decision. He requested a ceasefire and direct negotiations with human leadership. The meeting took place in neutral space, aboard a station constructed jointly by human and rebel council species. Ambassador Morgan, finally released from custody, led the human delegation. Opposite her sat the 5 members of the council tribunal, looking considerably less confident than they had during humanity's evaluation. Ambassador Morgan, Colon began, the council is prepared to offer humanity full membership with all associated rights and privileges. Morgan smiled, the expression carrying implications that the translator system struggled to convey to alien psychology. Counselor, that offer might have been acceptable 6 months ago. Circumstances have changed considerably since then. She gestured to the representatives seated around the negotiating table. The Cathmori, Ythmoran, Veltar, and 17 other species were now openly demanding fundamental changes to council structure and authority. Humanity no longer seeks membership in the council as it currently exists, Morgan continued. We are prepared to help establish a new galactic organization based on genuine cooperation rather than hierarchical control. The negotiations that followed lasted for weeks, but the eventual outcome was inevitable. The Council's military and economic power had been too thoroughly disrupted to maintain its previous authority. Species that had submitted to Council rule for centuries now had proof that resistance was possible and protection was available. The Galactic Confederation that emerged from the negotiations was a very different organization than the Council. It replaced. Membership was voluntary, with clear rights of withdrawal. Decision-making was based on consensus rather than weighted voting. Most importantly, no single species or alliance of species could claim authority over the military and economic decisions of others. Humanity took its place in this new organization not as junior members seeking approval, but as equals who had earned respect through their willingness to fight for their independence and extend that same opportunity to others. Captain Torres, promoted to admiral after the successful campaign, established the new Confederation's military doctrine. We defend the right of species to determine their own destiny, he explained to the first class of multi-species officers at the Confederation Academy. We do not conquer, we do not subjugate, and we do not impose our will on others. But we will fight to the death to prevent anyone else from doing so. Dr. Hayes became the Confederation's first director of xenological studies, working to understand and preserve the diversity of life and culture throughout the galaxy. His research stations became gathering places for species seeking to maintain their independence while participating in galactic civilization. Ambassador Morgan served as humanity's first representative to the Confederation Council.